Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. I will provide a bit of different perspective, mainly coming from the digital industry, because as we see these days, digital industry is the one who is usually asked to pay for a lot of things. And let's perhaps just go and see what are the fundamentals of the existing copyright system in Europe, and what basically could be some possible alternatives in the, let's say, fair remuneration for the authors, which I have to be very clear, we are all about this. Let's just make sure that we all understand what we are talking about and how to actually get there. So I will try to cover basically three things today. What is the situation today? What are the possible alternatives? And what could be the way forward? So on the situation today, what we have, I will use the example of so-called private copying. This is basically the so-called levy that is paid on every basically digital device that you can imagine today. Whether you can actually use it for the copying and you're using it or not, it doesn't matter. The thing is that actually you have to pay for it. The thing is that it comes from the EU directive from 2001, which says that basically if there isn't any possibility of private copying, then there is accompanying harm, if this harm can be demonstrated, and if it can be demonstrated, you basically need to compensate the authors and right holders for this harm. And that's as a concept a great thing, absolutely nothing around that one, if it would be properly implemented in practice. However, what we see is that this was implemented in 22 out of 28 member states. So this is also a bit of issue that immediately says that if you don't even have it in all member states, that obviously this is, let's say, differently understood by different countries, which means that we immediately have some sort of fragmentation. Second thing that is important here is that implementation of this system basically led to the effect that mostly collective management organizations are considering basically compensation for private copying as a sort of the revenue of remuneration. And if you basically read all the directives and all the legislation, there is a clear difference between remuneration and compensation. So not to be too legalistic there, but the key thing is that we really have to understand what we are talking about. And if we are talking about remuneration or as the revenue, then it has to be clear, it has to be defined, and then let's see what is the best mechanism to ensure fair remuneration. If we are talking about the compensation of the harm, then we have to stick both legally and in practice in that system, and then see how this works. What we can say from the now basically 10 to 15 years of the practice of this directive is that you have pretty much every year one court case coming to the European Court of Justice and one decision coming out of the court in the same issues, and all the issues are pretty much about the same things, which shows that system obviously doesn't work and it's not properly implemented, because if you have every year pretty much same question coming to the same place and you have pretty much same interpretations coming out of the same place, and then it's not implemented in the same place, meaning member states, then obviously something is not proper there. And the thing is, like I said, main understanding of collective management organizations, I'm not talking about right holders, is that pretty much anything that has any sort of memory should be liable to levy. This levy should be paid, and it's considered as remuneration to the author. And that's definitely wrong thing, because if you read properly the directive and all the legislation, what comes out is that this is compensation for harm, if harm exists, and if this harm is properly demonstrated and assessed. I will come later a bit to the point why this is important. So what we believe is that definitely something needs to be done about the system, not in a sense to abolish it, to completely discard it. No, this system can work, and there are situations when it's shown that it can work if it is properly implemented. That's what we are asking. And like I said, if there is so many court cases at the level of the Court of Justice, then obviously something is not right, because otherwise you would not have litigation, retroactive claims, and many other, let's say, misunderstandings of the system. So what we are talking about is that there should be some sort of the alternative to this. First of all, how this works today is a sort of, we can say, hidden tax. So our point is that if this works like a sort of hidden tax, why don't we call it a tax, define it as a tax, and according to the Court of Justice jurisprudence, it is ultimate obligation of the individual citizen to basically pay for the harm. Why? Because they're the one who are ultimately making copies. Therefore, they should pay. What the situation today is that this is not the case. Mainly hardware manufacturers and importers are paying for it, either partially or fully, and consumer is not even aware that they're paying for it. So we propose here a couple of solutions, basically what could be done as the alternatives. And of course, they're not popular because the situation in Europe is not great in the financial side. But we believe that these are worth of considering, especially the audiovisual, basically, and broadcasting fee, because many of these things and copying is coming from the actually audiovisual content side. Where do we see the way forward? We see it in a way that Commission, based on this jurisprudence, should make some sort of the guidance to all member states, helping member states defining what would be the proper methodology to assess harm. Why? Because based on the harm should come out this levy that is ultimately paid and borne by the consumers. So this should be obligation of the European Commission. Why? Because member states struggle with this. They do not have proper knowledge many times. And third, there is enough of the jurisprudence of the Court of Justice that would justify Commission decision. And we're not talking about legislation, it's just a recommendation. And this, in our view, would be basically the good step forward. And then, of course, to make sure that member states are starting to implement this, to demonstrate and assess what is the real harm per every basically device that should be subject or not to the levy. And then based on this, the proper levy should be decided, and there should be proper tariff setting system. On top of it, what we believe is that this levy, however you define it, should be visible and understandable for the consumer, because at the moment you have something which is waste disposable fee, you have value-added tax, you have various other fees that you are paying, but actually you know about them, right? You see them somewhere and you pay. Do you know that you pay a levy when you buy any of the digital devices? You don't. Why? Because you don't see it on your invoice. So these are the couple of things that we believe would be necessary to consider. And basically at the EU level. Why? Because, like I said, you see that from the implementation in these 20-something member states, actually what comes out is a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of legal uncertainties, and after all, a lot of litigation. And that simply doesn't bring benefit to anyone. It doesn't build up the single market, and it's not bringing any benefit to the consumer. Thank you.